He didn't shout, didn't laugh in disbelief, just blinked once like I told him we were out of milk. I'm getting married to someone else. I'd rehearsed the line so many times in my head, it had started to feel fake. But this morning, with the light pouring in through the kitchen blinds and his coffee still steaming, I meant it, every word. He took a slow sip, set the mug down, and said, "Perfect. Go live with him then." That was it. No plate thrown, no accusation, no begging. He stood up, rinsed the mug, set it neatly in the dish rack, then walked out. Not a slammed door, not a backward glance. By 8:47 that evening, his keycard didn't work anymore. His name was off the mailbox. The spare toothbrush, the drawer of gym shirts, his black boots by the coat rack, gone. Even the picture frame from that trip to Breckenridge had vanished. If you're still listening, and any of this feels uncomfortably familiar, hit like and subscribe. Most people just listen in silence, but that one click tells the team these stories matter. I sat on the couch in the fading light, still wearing my robe, toast untouched on the plate. I'd imagined tension, maybe even a dramatic scene that would justify what I'd done, but I got nothing, not even anger, just silence. The silence lasted. I checked my phone around midnight. Nothing, no missed calls, no texts, no "we need to talk." I stared at the door like he might come back and ask me to explain, to plead my case, but the door stayed closed. It felt like dropping a match into a pile of leaves and expecting a bonfire, and getting a puff of smoke instead. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he needed space. Maybe he'd come back tomorrow once the shock wore off. But Monday came. The hallway stayed quiet. His car wasn't in the lot. Tuesday, I noticed the Netflix account had signed me out, Spotify too. Our Amazon Prime profile, deleted. By Wednesday, the bank app showed our joint savings withdrawn, transferred somewhere I didn't recognize. All legally clean. I told myself I was relieved, that this was what I wanted. Freedom, excitement, someone who saw me, but that wasn't what I felt. What I felt was a growing, itchy discomfort, like I'd opened a door expecting drama and found only a void. He didn't ask who it was, didn't ask if it had started already, didn't even ask how long I'd been planning it. That part stung more than I expected, because for all the months I'd pulled away, distanced myself, built a new future in my head, I'd never imagined he'd let go without trying to hold on. I thought he'd at least ask me not to leave, but he didn't, and somehow that was worse. The first time I tried calling, it rang once, then nothing. Straight to voicemail, but not even his voice, just the generic system prompt. I hung up, tried again, same thing. Texted, "Hey, just wanted to talk. See how you're doing." No bubbles, no response, no read receipts. By that evening, I was logged out of our Hulu account, Spotify too, and when I pulled up the smart TV, his profile was gone entirely, like he'd never existed there. At first, I laughed, told Maddie over lunch, "He's being dramatic." Guess he took it well. She raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. The laughter didn't last long. That week, I went to schedule my next dental cleaning, and the receptionist asked, "Would you like to keep your records separate from Mr. Brennan's now?" I blinked. Sure. Even the dentist knew. I looked around the apartment, expecting him to drift back through the door, say something half clever, half cruel. But all I got was the click of the fridge at night and the shuffle of neighbors I never used to notice. He didn't block me on social media, he just deleted his name, erased every trace of him, cleaned with surgical precision, not in anger, not in haste, like he'd planned it, like this was a quiet escape hatch he'd built years ago and finally stepped through. I kept telling myself it was fine. This was what I wanted. Space, autonomy. I lit candles, ordered sushi, played the music he never liked. But the silence wasn't peace. It was absence. And absence has a weight. The guy I'd told myself I'd outgrown, the one who always played things too safe, too calm, he was suddenly a ghost, not pining, not chasing, gone. Even when I scrolled through our photos, ski trips, that anniversary dinner in Santa Fe, lazy mornings with his arm draped over me, I couldn't piece together when exactly he'd started pulling away, or if I'd ever really noticed how much he'd been watching, preparing, because none of this looked like a man blindsided. It looked like someone who'd already grieved, and now he was just done. I left him at that kitchen table with toast and coffee. I expected heat, fire, But he gave me a vacuum, and the thing about a vacuum is, eventually, it pulls. It tugs at your chest when the room is too quiet. It makes your phone feel heavier when no one texts. It turns even the sound of your own laughter into an echo you can't trust, and it leaves you wondering not if you made a mistake, but when he stopped waiting for you to change. The form sat in front of me, crisp and harmless. Just 2 pages, basic information, signatures, and a section marked prior marital status. I checked the box. Previously married. Then the clerk looked up, polite but firm. We'll need a finalized division of assets, or confirmation that there are none. I froze. That shouldn't be a problem. But when I reached out to the firm that handled our old accounts, the tone changed. The woman on the phone cleared her throat. Actually, Ms. Lang, your ex-husband submitted withdrawal documentation last November. Everything was signed, authorized, and finalized within 30 days. I gripped the edge of the counter. Finalized? Yes. Notarized, with the standard waiting period. Full distribution to parties. Your portion was transferred to a personal savings account ending in 9341. Do you not have access to that? My mouth went dry. That's not my account. She hesitated. You may want to check with your counsel. I hung up and stared at my phone, then opened the condo app, the one where we used to track our mortgage and utilities. Property not found. I called the management company. Hi, yes, I'm trying to verify ownership on Unit 3C. The woman paused, typing. That unit is now registered to a holding trust, Brennan Real Asset Management, LLC. Effective 6 months ago. Trust? Yes, ma'am. All rent payments and inquiries go through the trust administrator. Are you the current tenant? Tenant, I ended the call. The couch felt harder when I sat down. The walls of the condo I thought I still owned suddenly looked unfamiliar, like a rental staged to feel like home. I opened the fireproof box where we kept old documents, deed papers, tax returns, equity statements. Some were missing. Others had been quietly updated, dated and signed, my signature printed. From a joint authorization clause I'd never paid attention to. And suddenly, I remembered his voice on a random Tuesday night 2 years ago, eyes still on his laptop as he said, exit plans should be boring and legal, and I'd laughed. That's the most you thing I've ever heard. He didn't smile, just nodded once and went back to typing. Back then, I thought it was about estate planning, some theoretical future where we were still partners, cautious and meticulous. But now I was seeing the structure underneath everything, silent, airtight, impossible to fight. Even our brokerage account, the one we used to treat like a rainy day fund, had already been dissolved, no trace of it in my statements. He hadn't just left. He'd cleaned the slate, signed the paperwork, tied the knots, before I ever said a word about leaving, before I even knew I would. That creeping chill crawled up my spine as I looked around the condo, realizing that everything I thought I'd escaped into was balanced on a legal foundation I hadn't built. And now I was trying to walk forward only to find the floor collapsing under each step. I didn't just lose him. I lost the assumption that I was in control. When my fiance's lawyer brought up the prenup review, I nodded and said I might have my own counsel take a look. We weren't expecting complications. It was supposed to be a formality. But when my attorney dug in, he lifted his head halfway through the second meeting and asked, "Do you have a current address for your ex?" I blinked. "You mean from when he moved out?" "No, I mean now. Anywhere he receives mail, bank statements, legal notices, anything." I opened my mouth, then closed it. He jotted something in his notebook. I tried all standard traces. Nothing came up. No tax filings in the past 2 years. No W-2s, no property records under his name, no leases, no recent credit inquiries. His last known employer has no record of resignation, just that he stopped accepting payroll. He leaned back, fingertips pressed together. Either he's off the grid, or he's very, very good at disappearing. I brushed it off at first, said something about how he always hated digital clutter, probably just using cash and prepaid stuff now, but I couldn't stop the gnawing itch behind my ribs. I tried calling his college roommate, voicemail full. Then his former boss from the insurance firm, retired, said he hadn't heard from him since the pandemic. A high school friend he used to play tennis with told me flatly, "I think he moved upstate, or maybe out west. No clue, really." I scrolled through LinkedIn, found his old profile. blank, deleted. Instagram, gone. Facebook, ghosted. Even old Reddit accounts, wiped clean. I opened my laptop one night and started going through photo archives, wondering if I could catch a clue in the background of something, an envelope, a logo, a street sign. I found nothing. He hadn't just walked out of my life. He'd walked out of the grid entirely, no footprints, no signals, like a magician's final trick. But the curtain never came up again, and the longer the silence stretched, the more I stopped feeling annoyed and started feeling something else. I told myself I had moved on, that he was the past, that I had the life I wanted now. But deep down, something gnawed at the edge of every thought. What if he's not hiding? What if this was always the plan? What if the man I thought I'd understood, steady, predictable, safe, had seen everything coming and chosen to become untouchable long before I ever uttered the words, "I'm getting married to someone else"? What kind of man does that? Not the kind who yells, not the kind who begs, the kind who erases himself with precision. And somehow that was more terrifying than if he'd stayed broken and furious. Because fury is human, but vanishing like vapor, that takes intent. And I suddenly couldn't remember if I'd ever truly known who I was living with. It started with a road and a wrong turn on purpose. He left the interstate before the state line, followed an unlit stretch past lakes and frostbitten trees, and didn't stop until the fuel light blinked. The cabin he found was half collapsed in the back of a disused rental lot, but it had a wood stove, thick walls, and quiet that rang in the ears after too many years of screens and voices. That's where he disappeared. No cell reception, no Wi-Fi, no postal service unless you drove 40 minutes into the next town and waited for the window to open twice a week. He paid cash, never gave a forwarding address, told the guy at the supply store he was just passing through, then kept coming back. By winter's end, he'd fixed the roof, sealed the door frame, and insulated the windows with recycled batting and stubborn patience. By spring, the same man who used to color code spreadsheets was hauling timber with strangers who didn't ask last names. He was up at 4:45 most days, boots frozen from the night before, hands split at the knuckles. He didn't complain. That wasn't the point. At night, after the shift and the supper and the thawing of his bones, he studied. Not philosophy, not memoirs, business law, corporate structures, zoning codes, LLC loopholes. He read like a man taking notes for an architecture no one else could see. Year 1, he filed for a forestry operations certificate under a pseudonym, took no title, made no announcements. Year 2, he bought a share of the mill, quiet and legal, buried in the layers of an obscure county filing. By year 3, he was listed, on paper only, as a silent partner in 2 timber ventures. He never showed up for photo ops, just reviewed ledgers in a cabin by lamplight. By year 5, his name, real this time, appeared discreetly on the advisory board of a regional land trust. Not loud, not promoted, but there. He didn't create a LinkedIn, didn't update a resume. When the lawyers and brokers called to confirm his presence, they were told to send questions in writing. Most never heard back. He built a life that could be folded like a map and tucked away if needed. Not flashy, not loud, just stable. There were no dinner parties, no applause, just cold mornings, handwritten notes, and a wall covered in pinned documents. Trails of deeds, trust agreements, zoning memos, a blueprint only he could follow. Every now and then, someone from the old life would pass through the region, a contractor, a banker, a couple from the city looking for a second home. They'd never recognize the quiet man stacking firewood or fixing the dock pylons in the early fog. He wasn't hiding. He was healing by building, not a new identity, a refined one. Sharper, quieter, unreachable. And if she ever wondered where he went, all she'd find were legal signatures that traced back to nowhere and board minutes that listed him in footnotes, never in headlines. He hadn't just left her, he'd rebuilt, stone by legal stone, a life that didn't need her recognition to be real. The article popped up in a group chat. Someone had shared it half as a joke. "Your ex finally joined a cult or something?" Maddie had typed, followed by a laughing emoji and a link to the feature. I clicked it out of reflex. Rust Belt reinvented. Meet the man funding the comeback. A sleek header, stylized layout. the kind of puff piece that tried to sound gritty and visionary at the same time. I skimmed. It mentioned timber trusts, eco-reclaimed development zones, multi-state ventures. The investor stayed unnamed, a discreet founder operating through layered partnerships. But on page 6, there it was, a photo. Low sun behind him, casting the foreground in shadow. Construction crew behind a half-built structure. He wasn't facing the camera directly, just standing at the edge of the frame, clipboard in hand, head turned slightly, but I knew that silhouette, I knew that stance. Weight slightly back, left shoulder dipped like he was listening to someone you couldn't see, and I knew that jawline. Even with the collar up and the beard heavier, it was him. My hand didn't shake, but my wine glass did. It tipped over the edge of the couch cushion, sloshing red across the cream fabric. I didn't even try to stop it, just stared at the page, frozen. He wasn't dead. He wasn't broken. He hadn't faded into a cabin somewhere nursing heartbreak. He'd moved on, not with someone else, not with a new identity, but with purpose. He had grown, and I had missed every part of it. I thought I'd known him to the core, practical, cautious, always 5 steps behind the thrill, but that wasn't the man on page 6. That man had vision, reach, something clean in the way he stood, like the weight of needing to prove himself had finally burned off. And it hit me hard that I hadn't just walked away from him. I had walked away from who he could become. Worse, I had assumed there wasn't a who. I closed the tab, reopened it, zoomed again, checked the byline, checked the location, checked the timeline. All of it lined up. All of it proved something I didn't want to say out loud. I hadn't broken him. He'd used the silence to build, and now the distance between us wasn't just emotional. It was structural. He had real ground beneath him, assets, community. I stared at the stain bleeding into the fabric beneath me. There had been a time when I believed I was the one with momentum, the one driving change, pushing forward, but it turned out I was the chaos he'd needed to clear before becoming who he really was, and now I was just someone staring at a photo of a man I used to know who no longer needed to be known. I didn't plan the trip, not really. One minute I was staring at that damn photo in the magazine, the next I was booking a flight on points I'd forgotten I had. The hotel was 2 blocks from the address listed at the bottom of the trust's filing. The building wasn't flashy, not in a tech startup way, but it had weight. Dark steel, clean lines, a presence. Inside the lobby was marble, real, not the imitation kind, muted gray with gold veins under soft lighting that made everyone look intentional. You couldn't hear the outside world in there, just the hush of polished shoes and the soft clack of a receptionist's nails on glass. I stood there longer than I meant to. Finally stepped forward and said, "I'd like to see Mr. Brennan." The receptionist smiled with the kind of precision that came from practice. She didn't ask who I was, just glanced down, tapped her tablet once, then again. "I'm sorry," she said, still smiling. "Mr. Brennan doesn't accept unscheduled visitors." I blinked. "Could you just let him know I'm here? He'll want to see me." She glanced at the screen again. I can't override his directive. He was very clear. I fished into my purse, pulled out the old photo, wrinkled at the edges, folded from too many years in the back of a drawer. The 2 of us at our 3rd anniversary dinner, my lipstick smudged on his cheek, his hand around my waist. We looked happy, real. I placed it gently on the desk. "Please." Her expression didn't shift. She didn't even glance down. "I understand, ma'am, but my instructions are specific. No personal visitors, no exceptions." There was no cruelty in her voice, just protocol. I took the photo back, fingers trembling slightly now. Behind the frosted glass wall, I saw a shape moving down the hallway. He was taller than I remembered, or maybe he just stood straighter. Dark jacket, tailored. A man with somewhere to be. He walked past, didn't stop, didn't look. I opened my mouth. The words didn't come. I stood there, picture still in hand, as the automatic doors behind me whispered closed. The receptionist returned to her screen. My heart pounded, not from love, not from hope, from humiliation. Because in that moment I understood. I wasn't a ghost from his past. I was nothing at all. Not a threat, not a wound, just irrelevant. The photo in my hand might as well have been from someone else's life. He hadn't just moved on, he'd risen, and wherever I stood in his old world, I no longer had the clearance to enter the new one. It started with a notice on the door, reminder, rent increase effective next billing cycle. Please direct questions to property administrator, BRM Holdings. At first, I thought it was a mistake. We owned this place, or so I thought. The condo had always been in our name. I had the paperwork somewhere, but the mail told a different story. The return address wasn't ours. It belonged to a trust I didn't recognize. BRM Holdings. I stared at those letters for a long time before it hit me. Brennan Real Management. I tore through the desk drawers, the filing cabinet, even the old crate of papers I'd shoved under the guest bed years ago. There it was, dusty, buried beneath expired passports and warranty slips, the thin yellow folder labeled separation planning. Draft. I remembered the night he'd brought it up. Calm, measured. It's just in case, he'd said. Nothing changes unless something changes. I'd skimmed it, rolled my eyes. You really think we need a prenup this late in the game? I'd laughed. It's practically retroactive divorce planning. But he'd nodded. That's exactly what it is. I'd signed, barely glanced. I was too busy back then. Interviews, trips, distractions. Now, flipping through those pages, the language stopped me cold. Clause 14. In the event of relationship dissolution, all postnuptial equity or shared property reverts to trusts established prior to legal partnership. The BRM trust. He hadn't vanished. He'd simply moved the board, and now the apartment, the one I'd fought to keep, the one my fiancé had just moved into, the one with my name still on the buzzer, was legally under the ownership of a trust I'd agreed to defer to years ago, with a flourish of a pen and the assumption that he'd never use it. I kept reading. The clause wasn't hidden. It wasn't buried in legalese. It was plain, clear. I just hadn't cared enough to read it. I thought I held all the cards, but he'd been playing a longer game. Every venture, every silent partnership, every piece of real estate linked back to the same root, the premarital trust I'd once joked about. And now, all of it, the condo, the land developments, even the secondary stake in the timber operation was technically held under that clause. Not mine, never was. I picked up my phone, opened the message thread with my fiancé, hovered over the keyboard. What could I even say? We have to move. I don't really own the apartment. I laughed at a contract that just legally erased me from everything I thought I'd kept. No. Instead, I put the phone down, stared out the window, and realized that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped seeing him as someone capable of this. That was the final mistake. Not leaving, not cheating, underestimating the man who watched everything and always made sure the signatures were real. The ballroom glowed with soft amber light, the kind that made everyone look a little more important than they were. Waiters moved like shadows, threading between politicians, architects, developers, anyone who wanted their name tied to the phrase urban revitalization. My fiancé grinned beside me, tux just slightly off center. He leaned close, voice low. The firm that did the timber corridor? I've been following their work for years. Rumor is their founder's here tonight. I nodded, trying not to let my stomach twist. The program began. Speeches, smiles, carefully timed applause. Then came the final award. The Urban Impact Prize goes to a man whose work has quietly transformed decaying corridors into self-sustaining communities. A founder who asked not to be featured tonight, but whose legacy speaks louder than his name. I sipped my champagne and choked. Please welcome Michael Brennan. The glass tilted. My hand gripped it too late. It hit the floor. Not with a crash, just a soft, dull thud against the carpet. He stepped onto the stage, taller than I remembered, calm, sure, deliberate. He didn't beam, didn't nod excessively. Just offered a slight smile and a thank you that sounded like it was meant for the room, but not from it. Polite, measured, distant. I didn't hear the speech. All I saw was the outline of the man I once left over breakfast and the version of him standing under the lights now, untouchable, magnetic in his stillness, not seeking validation but receiving it anyway. Applause followed him off stage like a slow tide. I stood. I'll be right back, I whispered to my fiancé. He nodded, distracted, mid-conversation with a senator. I followed the hallway toward the back, dimmer, quieter. He was alone, adjusting his cufflinks near a catering door, coat slung over one arm. "Michael," I said, breath catching. He turned, not surprised, just still. For a long second we didn't speak. Then I asked, "Why?" He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Why did you vanish like that?" There was no accusation in my voice, just something unmoored, something that wanted ground again. He met my eyes, and I felt it again, that same sensation from the morning he walked out, that I was the one still reacting to a script he'd already stopped reading. He didn't blink, didn't soften, just let the quiet stretch. And somehow, that silence said more than I was ready to hear. I waited for softness, for something in his expression to crack, even just a flicker. But it never came. He looked at me like a painting he'd already taken off the wall. I tried again. I didn't mean for it to go like that. I was lost. He let the words sit there between us like steam off a dish no one was going to touch. Then finally he spoke. "You made your move." He paused, eyes steady. I made mine. I opened my mouth, maybe to explain, maybe to apologize, maybe just to touch something that still felt real. He shook his head, not harsh, just done. "No need for regret," he said quietly. "You gave me the perfect start." Then he turned, just like that morning. No goodbye, no drama. He walked back through the gold-trimmed double doors into the warm noise of the banquet hall, into the lights and the handshakes and the future I'd never imagined for him. For a long moment I stood alone in the hallway, holding my clutch like it was something that could anchor me. I looked down at my hand. The diamond on my finger was bright, costly, but somehow it felt like glass. I turned back toward the ballroom entrance and glanced up. There, etched into the glass above the archway, were the words, "Funded in partnership with the BRM Trust." I'd stood under it without even noticing. I was inside a building that belonged to him, not in name, but in structure, in deed. He hadn't just rebuilt his life. He'd built a world I could walk through but never claim. He didn't erase me out of spite. He just kept moving until I no longer existed in the direction he was headed. And now I was just a guest, wearing someone else's ring beside someone else's future, staring at the man I once thought would chase me, but he never did. He walked away and kept walking, until the only thing I had left was the last sentence I'd never forget.